Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's OHS Tech Talk. Today, we are very lucky to be joined by Reshma Khilnani, who will be giving a talk titled Medplum, FHIR Native Web Apps. Reshma is the CEO at Medplum, which is an open source toolkit for building FHIR native web apps. Reshma has an impressive experience as a visiting partner at Y Combinator and as a two-time founder for DropletKit.com, acquired by Row, and MedXT, which was acquired by Box. She is also an alumna at Meta, Microsoft, Box and BS, and MENG MIT Course 6. Today, Reshma will cover the opportunity and challenges in developing apps that use FHIR as their data model. She will also discuss Medplum's business model and how they hope to make a living off of open source. Today's talk will include demos and Medplum getting started tutorials. Reshma, thanks very much for joining us today, and I'll hand things over to you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Mick, for this introduction, and I'm happy for this opportunity to speak to you all. I think we have a lot of shared interests in our deep, understanding and interest in the FHIR ecosystem and also with open source. So I'm hoping to have, a little bit of presentation and then a lively question and answer session today. But I'll take it away here. And please, if you have thoughts and questions, I can see the chat, so would appreciate the chance to have real-time interaction. So let's get started. So what is Medplum? Medplum is an open source toolkit to build FHIR native web applications. So that's at the highest level what it is. I'll start maybe before we dive too into the details with a little story about our founding team. So these are our founders. We, myself, Cody, and Rahul. Notably, you'll notice, we have a crossover career. So, I myself have done venture capital. I was at early-ish on the team at Facebook. Cody has a career from Microsoft, and he was at One Medical as well on the provider side. And Rahul at Palantir and Applied Intuition. So these are kind of enterprise and very machine learning centric organizations. And so we're bringing that experience with us to this endeavor. And I'm going to run through the following agenda. First of all, I'll tell a little bit about our story. So pain points from our history of building medical applications. I'll go a little bit through Medplum's approach and how we're thinking about solving the problems that we have experienced in our career. And then I'll talk a little bit about open source and why we decided to make a commercial open source company and how we think about the opportunity on that front. And then I'll do some demos and we can do Q&A. So that's kind of where we're going. So like I mentioned, with regards to our team, our endeavor in building Medplum is informed by our experience. First of all, in big tech, Microsoft and Facebook, and getting a sense of professional software engineering in that environment and the type of infrastructure and quality control and the way web applications are developed at that scale was really informed by our careers in big tech. This same team built another startup. It was called MedXT, which was a RIS PAX. And that was our first endeavor. That was a long time ago. That company was founded in 2012 and was acquired by Box. And then we've also had the opportunity, I myself have worked with a lot of startups in a time working in venture capital and over the course of my career. And had a chance to work with entrepreneurs who are building applications for the first time, many in healthcare. So we have some experiences in enterprise as MedXT was acquired by Box and, have that time working with large enterprise customers to implement their healthcare and life sciences workflows. And Cody was a senior director of engineering at One Medical, which is a primary care company that was acquired by Amazon and has a lot of, they were real leaders in providing this primary care experience that's accessible and has a lot of interesting qualities. And there were a lot of learnings from building the infrastructure for that case. And then I myself have some time working in venture capital. So I was at a visiting group partner at Y Combinator. And notable in there, I had an opportunity to work with a lot of commercial open source companies and learn a lot about why they make sense and how they can really help um, in like delivering software in a new way and helping people develop their applications. So that's kind of a bit of where we're coming from. So as informed by, building many applications that are in the healthcare context, I'll include a LIS-LIMS, RIS-PACS, custom EHRs, patient portals, all as examples of medical applications. We experience the following pain points. I think they're first, we'll call it the terrible choice. So I'll go into this in a bit of detail, but basically, while developing your application, you have to make some trade-offs, and it's possible to leave with the impression that you don't have any good choices. So integrations and workflow in healthcare are very difficult, harder, I believe, than other sectors like fintech to build and maintain. So this is a common problem. And the the regulated environment is part of it, the vendor mix is part of it, but in general, this is just an extremely challenging aspect of developing healthcare software. Third, and I'm very interested to hear from this team in particular on this front, is poor data quality is very rampant. Duplication issues, you can't compare records that exist in different institutions. There's lots of subtle issues with the data that make it hard to trust. And if you're writing an application and you want it to have good quality data, for example, to report HEDIS or something like that, this is often an enormous lift for developers. So this is it's a big problem. And fourth, which I think is related to the first three, is that talent is very scarce. Like if, it's tempted to think of software engineers as a monolith and like, oh, there's a, pool, a labor pool, but really like these healthcare has its own domain specific nature, and like the intersection of those who are software engineers and who are trained in the specifics of the domain is rare. And in order to build an application, you often have a lot of people who are not trained in healthcare, and like as I'm often find myself in the position of telling them to please just use FHIR instead of like create a new patient table, create table patient ID equals X, this is a common pattern. And then the nature of the workforce and having so many people who are working in the domain who do not have healthcare experience just has a shape to it that's challenging to work with. So those are kind of the high level on the pain points. So first, let me talk about the terrible choice. So basically, say you're a company like One Medical, you're a provider or something like that. You have really a terrible choice. You can build a great tailored experience, but roll all of your own infrastructure, or you can use off-the-shelf products and fight with experience. So this is like a common choice that people have to make. And it's easy to be frustrated with this choice. Like if you want your great tailored experience, think about how much work you have to do to like build up your certifications, interop, workflows. But if you use the off-the-shelf product, it's very rigid. So you're kind of stuffing data where it's not meant to be, or you're doing unnatural things to get your, system to behave the way you want. I think this is a common experience that people have been having with developing these apps for years. And what's notable to me is that other domains have made more, for example, fintech or insurance technology, uh, have a better story in this regard than I've seen in healthcare. And that is part of the opportunity. That they don't have in those other domains the same terrible choice in the same way that we see in healthcare. And it's healthcare is harder. Developer productivity and velocity is slower, and sometimes talented engineers choose to work in other sectors. So this is a pain point, and things that we thought about hard when we decided to start Medplum. So that leads me to the next part, which is like our approach, how we've thought about at least chipping away at some of these problems. And I mean, the problems are very hard. I will never want to give people the impression that they will be overcome instantly. But, Medplum is a first step towards addressing some of these problems that we see day to day. And the approach is simple. The API is the product. This is a very headless product that is interop ready and has a lot of features that are designed to be programmed. Here's kind of an overview of the system. So, the core Medplum application, and this is an open source application, is right here in purple. And this is a source code that you can get on the internet. It has a data store, FHIR data store, and a FHIR REST API. And so that's a big part of it. We've invested heavily in the JavaScript SDK. And most of our customers and people who are developing on the platform, they're really here. They're writing a white label application on a custom domain. So it's like myhealthcareapp.com, and they're embedding our SDK. Now, what's notable about this developer paradigm is that these right here, this gray box that's running their website is a static JavaScript file. This has no backend, and it's meant to be very easy for, back to the discussion on the labor and labor shortage, for somebody who is, has a light education in healthcare, or they're from a different domain, but they know how to develop apps, to help them get productive very quickly. And they don't have to think about the complexities of the data model and the auth and all that stuff. They can just focus on the experience that they really care about, that's important to them. Notably is that integrations are very important to any healthcare application, and we think of integrations are the product, so that this is crucial. And we have our infrastructure here called bots. You can think of these as like lambdas. For example, if you create a new patient, you can invoke one of these lambdas to synchronize that data to a legacy EHR, either via FHIR, HL7. We support a bunch of data types. And we have a really streamlined developer kit so that, again, one of these developers who don't have a lot of history or training in the domain can be very productive very quickly in using this technique. So, and these, we provide the environment in which to develop these, and then all the tooling so that you can run them. So there's really no DevOps from the perspective of the developer. They're just writing their code and hooking it up. And this is a big productivity win for the engineer. And people bring their own code here. We have some partners who have written their own integrations, and we also provide some built-in integrations. So that's part of the customer experience. We also have access policies and identity. Literacy in general on FHIR and Smart on FHIR is growing, but we're part of the message there. helping people like understand how to use these tools, and the scopes and the auth is part of what we provide as well. And we just have a built-in implementation, as well as allowing people to bring their own auth if that's what they want as a developer. And then subscriptions, you can think of these as webhooks, allow event-driven applications to be built, and I'll show some examples of those in the demo. So this is the Medplum kind of overview. And I'll just like compare and contrast that with traditional software, healthcare software, which is like a full stack SaaS application that exposes some interfaces. In this model, it's hard to program a system like this. The developer experience is poor. Systems that we built like this tend to be brittle and slow, and interop is an afterthought. So we want to think about how to do this a bit differently from the traditional way. We believe that, assume we'll go back to this view, like all of the applications like a LIS/LIMS or a custom EHR or patient-facing apps, EDC, can all be built in this, simplified way. And it could be an effective developer model to get, more productivity, leverage, better interop, and just reduce the investment overall and have better tooling and story. So that's kind of the thinking. So I'll summarize it here. So our approach, interoperability is the product, not an afterthought. So I'll emphasize that. It's very common to have a SaaS app with an API, software as a service, by the way, app with an API to support interop. That generally is not the same as having a headless and dev tools centric focus. And we really live that difference. The programmability of the system is what we focus on. And you'll notice that our UIs, they look very bare bones because we're really focused on the programmability. And we hope for a lot of attention to detail on the developer experience. We consider testing and test-driven development, CI/CD, and documentation as products, and they're things that we deliver and part of our offering. And of course, our open source. Open source has a lot of interesting characteristics that are unexpected. I'll just put a little example here. Like we see people, our customers, searching our repo all the time. Like, how do I search for resources? Oh, here's an example. And they're just searching in the code for examples for how to implement their own applications and workflow. And it's a way to help people do a complex implementation without having to build the full stack SaaS app and then hand it to them. So that's the thinking. And we didn't make this up. GitLab, HashiCorp, Vercel, Supabase, these are examples of companies who are doing this in other domains. So GitLab does DevOps, and HashiCorp also is on the infrastructure side, infrastructure as code. And they're really focusing on the developer as being their advocate and their own audience that they're trying to reach. So I'll talk a bit about open source and how we think about it. So, and I will get, just put this in the chat really quick for everyone. Would love to have you all as, if you wanted to star our repo, that would be great. But really, why open source? That's a question. We believe, we know that open source enables developer productivity and velocity. If you are composing complicated systems to implement an application that's very functional, that has to do a lot of things and support lots of features. Able to do that effectively, open source is just a great tool. It's like it's a way for an individual contributor to make a lot of progress without being gummed up with a lot of meetings and compliance and access issues. And it's a way for them to also learn about how to do an implementation and a way to build trust. So once, assuming a developer is our audience and people who we think about as users of the product, we want them to trust it. We want them to think about how to solve their problems, using us as a reference. So that's really the thinking. And again, we didn't make this up. GitLab, HashiCorp, Vercel, Supabase, they really have a lot of mind share in this and in other domains. We are early in our open source life, so I'm really excited for the chance to meet you all and to have your thoughts and feedback and engagement as part of this community. But we publicly launched in September, around 190 GitHub stars, if that's a metric that people care about. So we're just getting started. 13 contributors and around 80 in our Discord. And we just released our V1. So we're like, in the stage of we do have some definitely implementations on the platform and are working to move past the early adopters in this coming year and have some more established players. So that's where we are so far. And our business model. So we're really focused on hosting, and we have our hosted product, app.medplum.com, where you can sign up, start building your application, and it provides that backend that is fully working and easy to onboard. And if you're a developer who wants to get started quickly, then it's a great option. Then, usually what we think of, how we think about deployments is that you kind of decouple them into two parts. So one is the developers who want to build the app, and they, build their applications, the mostly front-end applications or integrations. And then once they've made a significant amount of progress, the organization that they're a part of can make a decision. Do we want to go self-hosted and, install in our own environment, or do we want to use the cloud offering? And so we have invested in, SOC 2 Type 2 certification, HIPAA compliance, and we are working on our ONC certification. So we're going to really show our work on the compliance side as a way to have people think about using the hosted option. And again, this is a model that is modeled after GitLab, and they're very successful at doing this in the DevOps world. So great. Okay, so let's go ahead and move into some demos, and maybe I'll take a pause here. Yeah, okay. Developer experiences the product. Yes, Harry, that's good. If folks have thoughts or questions please feel free to go in the chat. And we'll obviously have the Q&A session, but I'm reading it in case you want to chat. So first of all, I'm going to demo the following things. So first, the admin console for developers. Next, a sample patient portal. So a patient logging in, a sample custom EHR. I'll show our storybook, which is our React components, and I'll do a brief demo of our documentation because, as I mentioned, documentation is a big part of the product. I think as a developer developing in this space, the number of times I had to contact someone to even get a copy of the docs makes me irritated. So this is what we're going to do. So first of all, admin console. So this is our admin console. You can see here it's app.medplum.com. And this is a, developer-centric view of your FHIR data. We have a list of the resources here on the side, and you can just browse your resources. As I'm talking to the folks who work on Cynthia, this is largely Cynthia data. And like you can add your fields to your list, you can filter. And the reason this is potentially interesting is that people are using this in the following way. They are actually learning how to program FHIR this way. They go to their work list and they look at their dev tools here. And let's see, fetch. They're like copy as curl. So they're learning how to construct their FHIR queries and other things this way. It's a great tool for teaching, and it's a great way to explore your data. And I'll go into that in a sec. So here's my Cynthia data. You can see this is, it's not super beautiful, but it's very functional from a developer perspective. You can see all the linked resources that are linked to this patient. You can, if you do the same inspect and copy as curl, you can view the queries to query all the resources related to the patient. Let's see, these are all FHIR objects. So you can, look at them, browse them. And then this is generated from the FHIR spec. So this is just a very good debugging tool where you can see all the fields. Great. You can touch them up if you need to. This is common when doing a deployment. Just add your identifiers, for example, or change address. If you don't yet have an app that's fully functioning, you can see the history. This is started by Cynthia. And blame. So if you're running a deployment, it's very often that you want to be who changed this data. So this is a great tool for that. JSON representation. And then there's this concept of apps. Basically, like if you have questionnaires that are linked to to the patient object, then you can just link them here. They are automatically linked here. So that's an example. So yeah, this is the admin console. It's very powerful. It helps the developer have like an on-ramp into FHIR that, for a novice developer, it can be pretty intimidating. For this crew, I'll show the batch upload. Like I think one of the top search items on our website is Cynthia. People generate their Cynthia or use Cynthia from files from GitHub and just upload them here or paste them as JSON here. And then, use that to quick start and prototype their application. I would invite all of you all who, if you're making demos or you want to like have a little environment to share with people, that would be, we would love to have you use the free offering. That would be great. And we'd really like that. We support all of the resources. We've just have like this account just has these ones configured, but you can change your user profile to have the quick links that you want. And there's a lot of like administrative tools to help you get started. One thing I'll note here is that there's this concept of bots that we talked about. So if you have a bot, this is basically like it's code, that executes. For example, in this example, if a patient fills out a questionnaire and you have a questionnaire response and you want to like compute some scores, in this case, this is the SDOH, I think social determinants of health, then you like can build out your scoring function. And if you want to like write it as an observation, you can implement a lightweight workflow here. This is just a very common thing. And the bots have, different flavors. There's integration bots, synchronizing to insurance. This is what a lot of the developers on the platform are doing. I'll go briefly into the questionnaire as well, because this is like very, a lot of developers, they are more focused on the patient experience or the provider experience, but they're setting up their questionnaires and stuff in the admin tool. And this is a Google Forms type experience for your FHIR questionnaire. So here's the builder. Wow, this one's really big. Add item. You can change the display. You can change, go through a bunch of different editing, and this is just like a way to build it. It just ends up being, your FHIR questionnaire object, and you have like the history and the blame, etc. Just like the other resources. And then you can preview what it will look like. And this is not very impressive in and of itself, except that you can use this form and embed it in your application. So that's the real use case. And people are tagging them with their various ontologies. So I don't have a good one here right now, but where did this form come from? What ontologies is it tagged with? That's very useful generally for getting your workflow to work right. Okay, let's see. So once you have all of these like resources in place, your questionnaires, your integrations, and you can start building a more powerful app. So I'll show you kind of in context. So this is FHIRmedical.com. This is also an open source application. If you go to FHIRmedical.com and just look at the footer, you can get to the documentation and stuff, and you can log in. It's a sample. It's not a real healthcare practice, but you can have like a very cool patient looking portal that looks white label. That's all FHIR native. And these are FHIR resources. I'll show you some examples here. Here's a lab result. Medications. It's a medication object. Vaccinations. Vitals. Blood pressure. This is based off of Cynthia data, by the way, but and kind of body temperature. You can add measurements if you want. And this is like the core data model. All the data for this is living on app.medplum.com. This is a static JavaScript site. It's very streamlined developer experience for a novice. Care plans, checklist. There's a lot of discussion in the community on how to represent care plans, and I'm curious on this team's perspective as well. But also get care. This is just a FHIR schedule with slots, questionnaires, but these are composing all of the things that you've set up in your app, in your admin console, into an experience that's sensible for the users. And it has, a lot of other FHIR resources. I think this example uses like 40 or 50 different type of resources in order to get this experience, but it absolutely can be supported. We have an alpha version of the FHIR provider as well, which is like a very simple EHR. I won't go to this in depth, but you can kind of see very similarly. This is the questionnaire object, which is actually comes, that we saw previously here in the admin console. So, and this is just a FHIR questionnaire object. So this is kind of helps people administer their practice in a more effective way. Let's see. So patient portal, sample custom EHR. I want to give time for questions, so I'm just going to blitz through the rest of these. But we have our storybook here online, which is just like our React components. These React components map generally to FHIR objects or FHIR data types. I'm showing like the diagnostic report display here because one of our claims to fame is that one of our customers has built a Liz LIMS, which has been certified by CLIA CAP on top of Medplum. And they use this diagnostic report display, which the CAP inspector has looked at, and you can see the code. This is just a diagnostic report. We have if you search in our repos for this, you can see the object. So it's got a lot of tools to help smooth the onboarding for the users and for the developers. And then finally, and the storybook, I think, is like one of the top things that developers are looking at in order to help build their applications more effectively. Finally, I'll move on to the documentation. So we invest a lot in our docs, and we absolutely we want feedback. So if anybody just looks at the docs, they find something they don't like, file a GitHub issue. We're happy to talk about it. It's the subject matter the subject matter is very dense. So it is a tough job to really document it in a way that makes sense for users. But we are working on it. One thing I'll point out here is that we have sophisticated search as very popular. And so oh, how do I invite a user? Okay, great. Or, I want to look at observation. Okay, yeah, here's my observation. And then these are all linked, and you can, see the care plan. So this is, part of what we're investing a lot in to help developers have a really good experience in getting their app up off the ground. And I can't stress enough that we love feedback on this, and this is all in GitHub. So if you ever wanted to contribute to documentation, write some tutorials, we would absolutely welcome that. And this is part of our open source project. So you can just go there. Great. And I think, we have our core repo and would have our lots of tooling and build associated with it. Let me see if I can find. Okay, so one thing I will note here is we have a pretty sophisticated build system, which is all publicly available. And it has code scanning and actually probably the best way to see it. And I'm also interested to talk to this group about is we have our build, of course, which includes a lot of code coverage and important things like that, code analysis. And if there was testing tools made by MITRE and other groups that could be incorporated into a build, we think that would be really high value. For example, just be able to test your conformance or ontologies or terminology. All of those things would be just very helpful, and we hope to, bend your ear on it or have the opportunity to at some point. So I want to leave time for questions, but and Mick is going to send out this, these resources, and these are all publicly accessible. So would love to have a dialogue about them. And here's my email. I'll put it in the chat.